course, they extensively use expeditionary renewables. You may remember it was then General Mattis who famously messaged back to the Pentagon when he was commanding Marines in Iraq, "Unleash me from the tether of fuel," because his fuel logistics were holding back his advance. The tankers couldn't keep up with the tanks. And we have lost over 1,000 service members in convoys hauling mainly fuel to forward bases, and that fuel is mainly wasted. You don't have to be an engineer to see what's wrong with this picture. The best way to defeat an IED is don't be there, right?
Right.
Get rid of the convoy by getting rid of the need to haul the fuel by putting efficiency and renewables forward. And indeed, our expeditionary forces have done this very successfully, but exactly the same logic applies to our bases and facilities in America and all over the world. And I think the reason DOD adopted this with such enthusiasm, it's now thoroughly instantiated in doctrine, is that they're not trying to make an ideological defense of one or another fuel sector. They're trying to do what works for their mission.
So you're interesting because you've been a clean energy advocate for so long, and a lot of people in the advocacy world for clean energy come out of the environmental movement, but you're really a markets guy. You believe in the operation of markets. But
as a considered tool.
As a considered tool. One thing markets don't decide is timing. And so what I'd like you to just comment on is whether or not you feel good about the timing of the market transformations that you've talked about, the transitions that this is about, this conference, this symposium about energy transitions. Are markets doing their job in dictating this transition in a timely enough way?
We're allowed to work, yes, but policy or other factors can get in the way. And also, I love markets as doing what they're good at, short-term allocation of scarce resources. They were never meant to substitute for politics or ethics or faith. I remarked in Natural Capitalism with Paul Hawken that markets make a great servant, a bad master, and a worse religion. So there's a lot that's beyond the boundary of what we can expect markets to do. And I salute all of you, whether in civil society or private sector or government or elsewhere, who are making good stuff happen faster for whatever reason you find important. And it doesn't have to be the same reasons that I have.
So I saw an interview of you recently where the interviewer asked you if you were optimistic or pessimistic about our future, and I found your answer fascinating, so I'm going to repeat the question.
Well, Dave Brower taught that optimism and pessimism are different sides of the same coin, the same irresponsible surrender to fatalism, in which you treat the future as fate, not choice, and don't take responsibility for creating the future you want. So instead, my colleagues at RMI and I live and strive in a spirit we call applied hope. And if you go to our website, rmi.org, and search on Berkeley, because there's actually 2 documents there called Applied Hope. Berkeley's the longer one. You'll find a little commencement speech on that theme. It's applied hope. It's not theoretical hope. It's not mere glandular optimism. It's taking choices every day to make a world worth being hopeful about. And that's a very practical pursuit, which many of you are well engaged in. Like that old activist said, St. Francis of Assisi, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. And let's see, there was the English author who said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible, not despair convincing. So, at RMI we do solutions, not problems. Transformation, not incrementalism. We're practitioners, not theorists. It's a very different framework, and I try not to hang out with folks that just talk about problems. It's important to understand problems, it's even more important to solve or avoid them, and you can't depress people into action.
I hope you're around for a panel we have tomorrow, I think of 10 or 12 CSU scientists that's just about solutions and
Could
great
be.
work that's happening.
Yeah, and remember, as Frankie LePay says, that hope is a stance, not an assessment.
Very good. So we have 5 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions, and we'll. Yes, sir.
What is your take on the economic competition between wind and solar? Is one of them further ahead than the other? By a significant margin. Let's say solar could be producing at half the cost of wind. Will that strand wind eventually?
Well, under the current policies, including the phasing out subsidies, again, as I said, generally smaller than the permanent subsidies to non-renewables, wind is generally ahead. The average wind power purchase agreement in the U.S. last year was 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. First half of this year, 1.7. We've recently seen contracts at 1.2. And there is a lot of ways to go on technical and operational innovation in wind. Solar, you may say on general principles, has more downward running room, and that may well be, but I'm not really sure it matters. They have different attributes. They'll go somewhat in different places, with the caveat I mentioned earlier that with higher solidity rotors and taller towers, it even works in the southeast now. But the point is, both of them are at around 3 cents unsubsidized in good sites in the global market, heading for 2, possibly 1. It doesn't matter when it's that cheap. I mean, this is almost the too cheap to meter scenario we used to hear about in another context. And I think we all need to think real hard about what does an era of almost free energy and quite possibly almost free storage mean? Like, does it make the grid a stranded asset? It's completely uncharted territory, and I know in our shop we're thinking hard about that.
Maybe one more question? Yes, we've got 2 guys, so you guys, same table. We'll do those 2 questions, that'll be it.
Okay, my question deals with when you talk about wind or solar, how much of wind can you rely on, or what's the percentage between night and day? Wind doesn't stop at night.
Yeah, it depends where you are. In some places there's a diurnal rhythm to wind, like some of the California passes with wind going in and out of the desert. In some places it's not that well correlated, so there's no general answer to the question, although I will say 2 things. First, that wind and solar are more often complementary than highly correlated with each other, and but again, it depends where you are. And second, there is a lot of diversity in wind regimes between different places. We did a study years ago for each of the 3 power pools from Texas to the Canadian border, up the middle of the country, and found that in each of them you could get the same firm power from less than half as much wind capacity if you constructed your portfolio out of anti-correlated sites. And by not doing that, the developers left half their money on the table. Of course, you can still do it after the fact with synthetic contracts, and I suspect some folks like, I won't say who, but some big players are probably doing exactly that.
Thanks. Last question.
Amory, I'm wondering if you've explained all this to the Trump administration.
Okay, no answer required.
I would if they asked. Well, the FERC comments and some I put into EPA on CAFE standards, do tell the story if somebody reads them. If not, I suppose they'll get to read them in the litigation briefs. We don't sue anybody, but others might.
So with that, we're going to end on a high and happy note.